I told my husband I had to stay late at work. It wasn't a lie, exactly. But it wasn't the truth either. I had an hour to spare before meeting Lucas, the man I once knew and loved, or thought I loved. It was an impulse, really. One that grew and swelled over the course of weeks until it became undeniable. That evening would change everything. David had no reason to question me. He never did. Our marriage had been quiet for so long, a routine of work, dinner, and sleep. We no longer fought. We didn't laugh much either. We simply existed together, two strangers who wore wedding rings. I wondered, sometimes, if David even saw me anymore. His eyes didn't linger on me the way they once did, as if he had forgotten how to look at me with the same intensity. I had stopped trying to remind him. That evening, I stared at my reflection in the mirror for a little longer than usual. My brown hair, usually tied in a messy ponytail, was smooth and brushed back. I applied just enough makeup to give me that effortless look, though I knew it wasn't effortless at all. My dress was something I hadn't worn in years, tight, black, and a little daring. It felt foreign on me, but as I looked at myself, I couldn't help but smile. I felt alive. Something in me stirred, something that had been dormant for far too long. David was in the kitchen, making dinner. I could hear him humming softly to himself. His back was to me when I walked in. I almost felt guilty for what I was about to do, but the guilt was too small to overshadow the excitement. I told him about the late meeting at work, about how I'd need to eat something quick before I left. He nodded absent-mindedly, as if the conversation didn't matter. We had become that way, I realized. Strangers in the same house, moving in separate worlds. "I'll see you later," I said as I grabbed my bag. David barely glanced up. "Okay. Be careful," he muttered. The words felt distant, as if we were actors in the same scene, but the script had long lost its meaning. I left the house and drove through the streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. I didn't dare look back. The guilt kept trying to crawl up my throat, but I shoved it down, reminding myself that I deserved this. Whatever this was, I deserved it. Lucas had sent a message earlier, saying he would be at the cafe by the park. I didn't need to ask if he'd still be the same man I once knew. People don't change, do they? At least, not in the ways that matter. I could already feel his presence in the pit of my stomach, the mix of excitement and dread. What was I doing? What was this really about? I didn't know the answers yet, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. When I reached the cafe, the familiar scent of coffee and baked goods filled the air. The place was dimly lit, cozy in a way that felt almost secretive. Lucas was sitting at a corner table, his face turned toward the door. When he saw me, a smile spread across his face, and I couldn't help but smile back. "Isabel," he said, his voice low and warm. I felt the years slip away as if they were nothing. "You look amazing." The compliment, simple as it was, caught me off guard. There was something about Lucas, even after all these years, that made me feel seen. Not like David did, who had grown used to the way I looked in the morning, disheveled and tired, but that was all. I sat down, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence between us. But then, it was as though the air between us shifted. The years we had spent apart no longer mattered. It was as if we'd picked up where we left off, as if time had no power over us. "Are you happy, Isabel?" Lucas asked, leaning in a little closer. I wasn't sure how to answer that. I wasn't even sure what happiness was anymore. I thought of David, of our life together. But what was it really? We had become ghosts to each other, and I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen for who I really was. I hesitated, my voice trailing off. I don't know. I think I'm trying to be. Lucas didn't press, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. I had told David so many times that I was fine. I had convinced myself that I was fine. But sitting here with Lucas, I realized just how far from fine I truly was. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing like it always had. But this time, it was different. There was an undercurrent of something else. The energy between us had shifted, had become something more than friendly. At times, it felt as if we were the only two people in the world. Lucas spoke about his life, his travels, his work, his failed relationships, and I listened, not because I cared so much, but because he was here, and I needed him here. At one point, I glanced at my phone, and my heart skipped a beat. There was a message from David. "How's the meeting going?" I quickly typed back, "It's running late. I'll be home soon." I sent the message before I even realized I was lying. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary, wasn't it? If I told David the truth, if I told him where I really was, what would that do? Would it change everything? Would it break something between us that couldn't be fixed? It wasn't that I didn't love him, I did, in some way. But love was complicated, wasn't it? And sometimes, it was easier to let the lie linger than face the mess of the truth. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself conflicted. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. "I should go," I said softly, standing up from the table. Lucas looked at me with those eyes, the ones that always made me feel like I was the center of his world. "I'm glad you came, Isabel," he said, his voice sincere. "I've missed you." I walked out of the cafe with the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had kept up the act for so long. But as I stepped into the cool night air, I wondered how long I could keep pretending that this wasn't unraveling everything. The night felt heavier as I drove back home, each mile a reminder of the lies I'd told. It was a strange kind of weight, one I hadn't expected when I'd first made the decision to meet Lucas. I had expected excitement, maybe even relief, but now, all I felt was dread. The silence in the car pressed against me, suffocating. I could almost hear David's voice, asking me where I'd been, what I'd been doing. I could picture the disappointment in his eyes, the one I had stopped noticing a long time ago. The guilt crept up slowly, like a shadow that refused to leave. I tried to push it away, to convince myself that I deserved this, that I needed this. I needed something to feel alive again. But as I pulled into the driveway, my heart sank. This was real. David was inside, waiting for me. And soon, he'd notice. I walked through the front door and immediately heard the sound of the TV from the living room. It was almost comforting, the familiarity of it. I wasn't ready for the confrontation I could feel coming, so I tried to act casual. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and walked toward the kitchen. I could hear David moving around, likely preparing something for dinner. He always did that when I wasn't home, as if trying to fill the silence between us with the sound of clinking dishes. "Hey," I said, my voice a little too bright, a little too forced. David turned from the stove, offering me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey. How was your meeting?" He didn't sound suspicious, but I could hear the undertone of weariness in his voice. "It was good." "Really long," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down at the table. I forced a smile, but it felt unnatural. I had gotten so good at lying that I almost believed my own words. Almost. But tonight, the cracks were showing. The guilt twisted in my stomach like a knot, and I could almost hear the questions piling up behind David's silence. He set a plate of food in front of me and sat down across from me. We ate in silence for a while, the only sound being the clink of forks against plates. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as if everything between us was hanging by a thread. I could feel David watching me, his eyes sharp despite the calm exterior he always wore. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him about Lucas, about how everything between us had changed. I wanted to explain why I'd lied, why I felt this overwhelming need to be with someone else, to feel something, anything that wasn't this constant weight of indifference that hung between us. But I couldn't. The words felt foreign to me, like something I didn't know how to speak anymore. David broke the silence first. "You've been acting strange lately," he said, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want to upset me. But I could hear the uncertainty in it. The suspicion. "Is everything okay?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. His words hit me like a cold slap, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The tension in the room grew thicker, and I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. How long had he been noticing? How much had I let slip? The lies were starting to fray, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep up the act. "Everything's fine," I said quickly, too quickly. I tried to sound convincing, but even to my own ears, it came out wrong. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered. I forced myself to take a deep breath. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." David nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe me. He didn't trust me, not the way he used to. He was pulling away, and I knew it, even if he wasn't saying it out loud. The silence stretched between us again, more oppressive this time, suffocating. After dinner, I went upstairs to the bathroom, needing a moment alone to collect myself. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my hands shaking. What had I become? Who was I kidding? I had told myself this was just a small thing, a way to feel something, to fill the emptiness that had settled in my chest. But now, standing there, I realized that the emptiness had grown, had become a gaping hole that no lie could cover up. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Lucas. "I can't stop thinking about you," it read. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I felt something stir in me again. But then the weight of the situation crashed down on me. What was I doing? What was I really hoping for? I quickly typed back a response. "I'm sorry. I need to be home. It's complicated." I didn't want to hurt him, but I didn't know how much more of this I could handle. It was as if I was living in two separate worlds, each one pulling me in a different direction. As I looked at the screen, the message from David earlier flashed in my mind. The way he had asked me if everything was okay, the concern that had been there, hidden beneath his words. He didn't ask for much, David. He never had. But now, the space between us felt too wide to bridge. I went back downstairs, pretending like nothing was wrong. But it was. It always had been, I just hadn't wanted to see it. David was sitting on the couch now, flipping through channels, and I sat next to him. I leaned my head against his shoulder, trying to feel the connection that had once been so strong between us. But it wasn't there anymore. It felt hollow. "Isabel," David said quietly, his voice hesitant, "is there something you're not telling me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to say everything, to admit the truth, to tell him what I'd done, what I was doing. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the lies were all I had left. "I'm just tired," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll be okay." David didn't respond. He didn't have to. He knew. The morning after, the air in our bedroom felt different, stifling, heavy, as though the night had lingered into the day, hanging around me like a scent I couldn't shake. I woke up before David, as I often did, the sheets still warm from his body, and yet I felt miles away from him. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing beside me. For a moment, everything felt normal. But it wasn't. It never would be again. The guilt from the night before twisted in my stomach. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I reached for it without thinking. The message was from Lucas. "I miss you already. Hope we can do this again soon." I stared at it for a long time, my heart racing, my thoughts scattered. What was I doing? What did I want from all of this? I had told myself that meeting Lucas would give me something I had been missing, something I couldn't find with David. But now, looking at the screen, I realized I didn't even know what that something was. I didn't know what I was searching for, or if I would ever find it. The more I tried to lie to myself, the more the truth pressed against my chest, suffocating me. David stirred next to me, his hand reaching for me in his sleep, and I forced a smile as I slid my phone under the pillow. I couldn't let him know. Not yet. Not like this. "Morning," I said softly as I turned toward him. He smiled sleepily, reaching out to pull me into a hug. "Morning. Did you sleep okay?" I nodded, but the question felt too loaded. How could I answer that honestly? How could I say I had slept fine when the weight of my betrayal pressed on me like a 1,000-pound stone? David kissed the top of my head, a gesture so familiar, so comforting. It almost made me want to collapse into him, to forget everything, to pretend that nothing had changed. But I couldn't. I was already too deep into this mess, and I had no idea how to climb back out. I forced myself to get up and go through the motions of the morning. I made coffee, grabbed the cereal, but the usual comfort of routine didn't offer any relief. Everything felt off. The way David moved, the way he looked at me, it all seemed foreign, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that he knew something was wrong. The phone buzzed again. It was another message from Lucas. "We should meet tonight." I set the phone down quickly, my heart racing. How was I supposed to keep living this double life? How long could I pretend like nothing had happened, like I wasn't tearing my own life apart? As the day wore on, I couldn't shake the sense that something was building, something I couldn't control. It wasn't just the affair that weighed on me, it was the distance between David and me, the way he seemed to be growing more distant with every passing day. It felt like we were both playing a game, pretending that everything was fine when, in reality, it was all crumbling. The tension in the air was palpable when David got home from work. I didn't know if he knew what I had been doing, or if he had just started to sense that something was wrong. The way he looked at me made my skin crawl with unease. There was a quiet suspicion in his eyes, a question he hadn't asked yet but was clearly on the edge of his tongue. I greeted him with the usual smile, but it felt strained. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "It was fine," David replied, but his voice lacked the usual warmth. He was distracted, his mind somewhere else, and I wondered if he was starting to piece things together. I had been lying to him for so long, and I had grown so accustomed to it that I thought I could keep the act going. But now, I wasn't sure anymore. He was picking up on something, and I didn't know how to stop it. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. The lies had caught up with me. I tried to act casual. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired." David stared at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine as if looking for something that wasn't there. He sighed and sat down next to me on the couch. You know, I've been thinking, about what? I asked, my throat dry. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I knew I couldn't handle another lie. About us, he said, his voice softer now. About how things have been for a while. I felt my stomach drop. This was it. The moment I had been dreading, the moment I would have to face everything. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to be honest, to confess what I had done, to explain why I had done it. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat there, frozen, pretending that I hadn't just been living a lie for weeks. David reached out, taking my hand in his. Isabel, I need you to be honest with me. Something's been off. I can feel it. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything to push the truth away, but then I saw it. The look in his eyes, the look of a man who had been hurt too many times to believe in the lies anymore. It was too late. The mask I had worn for so long was slipping, and there was no way to put it back on. I've been seeing someone, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I've been lying to you. David didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at me, his grip tightening around my hand. The silence between us was deafening. I had never seen him like this before, so broken, so unsure. For a moment, I felt something close to panic. What had I done? I don't know why I did it, I said quickly, my voice shaky. I don't know how we got here, but I'm sorry. I've been lying to you. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. David stood up, his face pale, his eyes empty. I thought I knew you, he said, his voice low and barely audible. But I don't. Not anymore. I felt the words cut through me, sharper than I had imagined. The truth was out, and it had done its damage. There was no going back. He turned away from me, walking to the door. I need some space, he said, and before I could say anything else, he was gone. I sat there in the silence, the reality of what I had done settling in. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, suffocating. David was right. He didn't know me anymore. And I wasn't sure I knew myself. The lies had consumed me, and now there was nothing left but the truth. Lucas had reached out again. Can I see you tonight? I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keys. But I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say anymore. The man I had been, caught between two worlds, was gone. And all I had left was the truth, the one thing I could no longer avoid.